I'm willing to bet you remember Miss Cleo. She was the biggest name in the psychic hotline era, and she had those legendary commercials. There's a brand new movie that wrestles with Miss Cleo's story and influence. Today on the show, the rise and fall of Miss Cleo. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, go on this journey with me. Close your eyes and imagine it's like the late 90s. You're watching TV. It's a commercial break during your favorite show, and then this comes on.
With the help of the spirits and my tarot cards, I can see your life even more clearly than you can yourself. He likes to fish, right?
Yeah, he goes fishing all the time.
The man loves you desperately. You understand me?
Oh my God, I cannot believe it, how right you are.
Call for your free reading now.
That is an infomercial for Miss Cleo's psychic hotline. In the late 90s and into the early aughts, Miss Cleo's no BS readings and her let's say questionable Jamaican accent made her one of the biggest names in the life and relationship advice game. But Miss Cleo's rise was quickly followed by an investigation. It revealed this massive telemarketing scam, and then came the public backlash that basically ended Miss Cleo's dominance. Well, Lifetime just dropped a new biopic on Miss Cleo's rise and fall. The bad news is it is not available in Canada yet. The good news is it's a good time to revisit Miss Cleo's controversial legacy. Ashley Ray remembers when Miss Cleo's infomercials were a thing. She's with me now. Ashley, welcome back to the show, friend.
Hi, thanks for having me back. I'm so glad to be here talking about Miss Cleo.
Out of all things, let's get into it. Okay, so before we actually get into Miss Cleo's story, maybe it'd be helpful to remind the young folks, about an era where these big psychic hotlines were a big thing in the 90s.
Yeah.
How do they work? What were they?
Yeah, and just it wasn't even just psychic hotlines. It's the 90s. The internet is fresh. People are lonely and bored.
Yep.
There were just you could call to get your horoscope daily. There were calls for everything, but the psychic ones in particular, they would really play on your fears, relationships. You would call in and they would just try to keep you on the line for as long as possible, because this was such a common job at the time. There were basically warehouses of telemarketer workers, kind of like, telemarketing today, who were getting paid sometimes 50 cents to $1.50 an hour. And the longer they kept you on the phone, the more money they made. So it often would seem like, start with a free call. The trick was you call a number, they give you another number to call. That's where it's no longer free. And then they keep you on the line, and then sometimes would even charge your phone number, even if you hadn't called or for future calls. And that was what eventually brought it all down. But, if think about those websites today where you put in your email or Twitter handle or whatever, and it's like, we're going to generate whatever, your profile, or, make a joke about you. We were so bored in the 90s, we would pay people to basically do this for us on the phone. It was just... Even kids were just making these phone calls to play pranks and just to hear someone talk.
But can I just say, the difference is some known figures were involved in these psychic hotlines.
True.
Dionne Warwick was on my television. Dionne Warwick was on my television. I mean, you should call the psychic hotline.
Yeah, there was a Jackson sister, not the famous one. She also Toya had a talk line. So they were somewhat legitimate. It wasn't like, my craziest aunt uses these phone lines. They were pretty common. It was, a normal, popular thing to do. It was also normal to know people who worked at these hotlines. And that includes, sex hotlines, psychic hotlines. And it was just kind of seen as an acting role, as a character role. And so that is how Miss Cleo sort of entered the arena and started this as an actor.
It occurred to me that when Drake released Hotline Bling, some people might not have known what he was talking about, which is quite alarming. But into this entire universe, I want to talk about Ure Harris, because that's her real name. That's Miss Cleo's real name. Let's talk about how she got into this. How did she start first making waves in the psychic hotline game?
Yeah, so she, like I said, started in the theater. She was a Philadelphia actress who was in a play with a Jamaican character named Cleo, and that's how she came up with it. She did eventually scam everyone at that theater. She told them she had bone cancer. She told them she couldn't pay them. She ended up leaving town, and before she left, though, she did give each person a letter apologizing and telling them how much money she owed them and promising she would make it right someday.
Oh, wow.
So it's not like she was a scam artist. It really did seem like she was this woman who got in over her head. But she leaves town. She goes to Florida. And that's where she gets pulled into this. You know, she needs a job. She has 2 daughters to support. And she finds the opportunity to act and work at a phone line. And when she starts, it's, you know, they're basically all looking for gimmicks, ways to just keep people on the line and keep it interesting. And she finds that when she uses this Miss Cleo character who has a Jamaican accent, she does not. That is not her real voice. So she starts playing it up. She did dabble in tarot cards in her life. It's not like she was a legit tarot card reader, though. But, you know, having the cards, using them and pretending to look at them on the phone calls, it helped her build a reputation to the point where people would just call in for Miss Cleo. And in basically a year, she had generated more income by herself than like a combined team of psychic callers. And that's when they were like, we got to do something with this lady and really make her the center story. And they didn't mind that she was playing a character because at the time, all of these phone lines made it clear that they were for entertainment purposes only.
Yeah.
So it's not like she felt this moral conflict. She saw it as an actor who took a role that was starting to blow up.
It is hard to overemphasize the idea of how magnetic she was. Let's hear a little bit of what Miss Cleo sounded like.
Who asked you to go out of town? The stupid young one or the married one?
The married one.
That's what I thought. Don't go, you hear me?
Could you tell me what type of direction is my life headed into?
Last 4 nights, your feelings have been hurt, so you've been up all night.
Yes.
You haven't been, and this is around the relationship.
Oh, talk about it.
Okay? Don't make me take you to church, young man.
I mean, she was just like infinitely listenable. You know, like you could just kind of keep listening to her in that accent. That is not her real accent. One of the big questions sort of circling Miss Cleo, you know, apart from whether she was a real psychic or not, which is not a my department thing to determine, was whether she was actually Jamaican. What do we know about that part of her backstory?
Yeah. So when these lawsuits started coming up, Florida took it upon itself to file a civil suit against Miss Cleo because they really wanted to focus on the fact that she was not Miss Cleo. She was Ure Harris and she was not Jamaican. So as part of this, they got her birth certificate. So factually, what we learned from the HBO doc, this is revealed, is that she was born in LA to American-born parents, although her parents were of Caribbean heritage. That is confirmed by friends and family who were interviewed in the HBO doc.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what is, though, kind of hearsay is that, yes, her parents were of Caribbean heritage, but Miss Cleo, Ure wasn't really about it. It's not like she was interested in it. She didn't really, you know, show any interest in a specific place in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
You know, she would just say their Caribbean heritage. And it's like, well, okay, which one? Do you want to get specific? And it wasn't until she got this job that she started with a Jamaican accent. And then when she moved to Florida and the character really started to pick up, she befriended a Jamaican family to kind of add some legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, who is to say how close they really were, or, you know, maybe she truly did feel as though she was adopted by them. But some other people believe it was more crass and it was just her trying to later solidify this Jamaican identity. But, you know, what we do know is that it was a character. It was a character. You know, we do know she was born in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So yeah, but at the same time, this is a time when it's clear this is for entertainment. It's normal for sort of these larger than life characters to have a big personality. And I don't know that Miss Cleo would have gotten in trouble if she had pivoted to a talk show. But when you have, you know, collections calling people for money and you're up against lawsuits, that's when it's kind of like, oh, you aren't genuine about anything.
Can I get from you an idea of just like at her peak, how big of a deal Miss Cleo was?
Yeah, I mean, according to the documentary that came out, which, by the way, sorry, Canada, that you cannot watch the Lifetime movie, but let me tell you, you're not missing out. Just watch the documentary, Call Me Miss Cleo.
The documentary is
It's
on
gonna
HBO. It's on Crave in
it's on it,
Canada.
yeah,
It's
it's on
really
HB
good. Yeah,
Crave.
yeah,
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot better than the Lifetime show anyway.
yeah.
But according to that, at her peak, she was generating 24 million alone for this company.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it obviously reached a
Oh,
point where
wow.
her
Yeah.
her phone calls and her just television appearances were so popular, people couldn't even get to Miss Cleo when they called, which was another part of the lawsuit, because it was saying call to talk to Miss Cleo, and people would call and call. And well, Miss Cleo could only talk to so many people in a day, and they
Yeah.
couldn't do, pre-recorded anything. So that was another part of the lawsuit, where so many people were calling in that they just could not even cover it. They had to literally pull people off the streets to pretend to be psychics, because people will go, well, fine, I guess I'll talk to someone else. So just that's how big she was. Was she seeing that on the back end? In Florida, she did have a nice house. She was making a lot of money, but it was temporary. She also was not getting nearly enough of that 24 million as she should have.
Right.
And at one point was served. She had to file for bankruptcy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, again, it's this thing where she created this character, but pretty quickly, when the overall company, the Psychic Network, saw how much money they can make off of it, they started basically controlling and owning her. They owned Miss Cleo, and Ray Harris really did not own any part of it.
I think like that's a part that's often sort of overlooked when it comes to Miss Cleo's story, because we learn a little bit later that she was being taken advantage of by her employers. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the way that her relationship to her employer changed later?
Yeah, when she started this, she was obviously this woman desperate for a job to get paid. She took a bad contract and deal with the Psychic Readers Network. And then when they eventually pivoted and gave her her own line, they did not really increase her money to match. And they obviously did not care about protections like making it clear this is a character that we own in certain things. So when these lawsuits hit, Miss Cleo was able to be named in them because they saw her as a functional part of the scam, that along with scamming on her accent and pretending on her background, she was also helping to scam with the company and to defraud all of these people. That wasn't the truth. We don't know how much she exactly knew, but she didn't know that they were charging dead phone lines, and people who weren't supposed to get charged were getting charged, and numbers that had never even called were getting charged. She didn't know that level of detail, but she was definitely in it for the money. I'm sure at some point she said, hey, the commercials say these are free calls, so if they're free, how are we making money? I'm sure, at one point that question must have come up for her. So it's not like she put this plan together. She more saw it as, hey, I can play this character. I can do this once I get out of this contract. I'll buy the character out and be able to do my own thing. She didn't realize the level of liability she was sort of getting in bed with.
I think when we sort of look at this whole situation with Miss Cleo, the writer Jenna Wortham said Miss Cleo predated the Kardashians in understanding the importance of a personal brand. I think that's a significant statement from Jenna. This is someone who keeps popping up in pop culture around us. We talk about the skit on Dave Chappelle. We talk about Mad TV. She's a voice on Grand Theft Auto. She was a spokesperson for a cosmetics brand. And in the past 2 years alone, there have been 2 movies about Miss Cleo. Why do you think she's still a pop culture fixture?
I think mostly it was a lot of fun. It really is kind of fun to remember these just things that today it's like, what do you mean a telephone line? Like the whole thing just seems so
90s?
nostalgic and 90s. So I think that's part of the fun, but also, I mean, there was a lot of fun in Miss Cleo as a character. The sketches were funny. It was funny to watch the infomercials and see if there'd be some new drama. Like, oh my gosh, this girl lady is sleeping with a married man. They were fun to watch. I also think, Miss Cleo, the reason her character worked is because she told people what they kind of wanted to hear. She knew how to tap into those dreams. And I think that kind of made her fit into this mammy stereotype that, I think really worked for some listeners and audiences to go, oh my God, she's so right. She's making me feel better. Like, oh, wow. Yeah, that is exactly what I needed to hear. That is the guidance I needed in life. And I think that's something that's resonated. I think, she probably could have been a tarot reading Oprah had things gone her way more. And so I think that's why her as a character, she stuck for so long, because she really did almost reach this sort of Oprah level of presence and just brand recognition where again, like you said, Chappelle, Mad TV, all these places could do sketches about her. You can just say, call me now, and people know who and what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, personally, I think if Miss Cleo were still here, she would probably be having some sort of like Britney Spears-esque redemption tale
Oh,
where
wow.
people would finally be like, you know what? Yeah, she wasn't the one pulling the strings here. She was this woman like doing her best who created a character. And yes, she knew she wasn't Jamaican, but it was a character. She knew it was for entertainment, and I
Yeah.
think we would see that people have more sympathy towards her today.
Ashley, we got to leave it there, but I really appreciate your time, friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Ashley Ray is a comedian and podcaster in LA. She hosts the show TV Essay. If you're in the US, the film Miss Cleo, Her Rise and Fall just came out on Lifetime, if you must watch it. But here in Canada, you can find that documentary, Call Me Miss Cleo, streaming right now on Crave. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. This song is called Hood. It's from a movie that is out right now that I love so much. I've gone to see it twice. I'm going to tell you that I think it's probably my favorite movie of the year so far. The movie is called Kneecap. It's a semi-fictional account of how an Irish hip-hop group by the same name got its start. These three guys, DJ Provy and Mowgli Bap and Mokara, they rap almost entirely in Irish. And that might not seem like a big deal to you, but in Belfast where they live, young people making music in Irish is highly political, and who gets to preserve the Irish language is also just as fraught. Louise Bruton is here to unpack all this with me. She's in Dublin. Louise, welcome back to the show, friend.
Well, thank you so much for having me on and for a topic so close to my heart as well.
Of course. Hey, let's get into it. Okay, let's start maybe by explaining to people who the three men of Kneecap are, because two of them met as childhood friends. One is an Irish language and music teacher by day, and by night he's something else. How do they start making music together?
Okay, so the way that it works is the two younger members of the band, their day names are Limo Knahanig, and he goes by Makara, and then there's Nisha O'Carolyn, and he goes by Mowgli Bap. So these two young lads have been best friends since they were as small as can be, and they eventually got into becoming drug dealers in their West Belfast surrounds.
Yeah.
And when they got arrested by the police one night, one ran away, and then the other one was brought in for questioning. But the film is set in 2017, and at that time, the Irish language was not formally recognised as an official language by the UK, and the 6 counties of the north are legally recognised as the UK. So, as his resistance to arrest, he decided to speak in Irish, Os Gaeilge, so that the police officers couldn't understand him, and for that to progress, they had to call in a translator, and that translator ended up being the third member of Kneecap, JJ O'Dartig, who becomes DJ Provy.
Yes. I mentioned how political it is to be making rap music in the Irish language. You know, this film is set sort of in the last sort of like 6 or 7 years or so. What is the fight there around the Irish language right now?
So the fight for the Irish language, I mean, we could go back 800 years, but the Irish language is Ireland's primary language. It's on every street name. It's on every. It's on. People have Irish translations of their name, but the Irish language decreased in its use because of British rule, which started in around the 17th century and worked its way on. And they eventually made the Irish language a thing to be punishable by crime. And then the certain things like the famine eradicated the Irish language and a lot of Irish speakers, either through death or immigration. And the Catholic Church, they chose to prioritize the English language over the Irish language, seeing it as a kind of a top tier language. So the Irish language was not supported in any way, culturally, socially, economically. And it became this representation of Irish speakers are Catholics, English speakers are Protestants. And with British rule, Protestant religion was the thing that was trying to dominate the entire country. So the oppression that began then has had this cascading effect on the Irish language now. So much the oppression was so successful that some people don't see the purpose in putting any money or putting any effort into maintaining the Irish language.
Right.
And in Northern Ireland, when the conflicts between Catholics and Protestants are so severe and have been so violent, the the right to speak Irish is a greater need. So the people who choose to keep speaking Irish in the north of Ireland, they link it with freedom, which is a
Yeah.
very powerful thing,
And
and
that's
it's very unusual.
So that's the context in which this movie sort of arrives in, or Kneecap even sort of arrives in. The Kneecap write, hip hop songs entirely in Irish that become a sensational hit. We specifically, maybe we'll begin with CEARTA, which spells out the Irish word for rights. Let's listen to some of that song right now. CERTA is coming. Louise, this song got banned by radio. What is this song about?
So this song is about, so like you said, CEARTA, Ciarta, that translates into rights, and it's about their right to sell drugs and not get arrested. So that song, when it was released in 2017, that song was actually banned by our national Irish-speaking radio channel, which is RTE Radio na Gaeltachta, which is a radio station that all of its presenters only speak in Irish, and they celebrate mostly a lot of trad and folk music that would be in Irish. And then there is a slight kind of fraction of music of pop music or rock music that would also be in Irish. So the fact that they banned a hip-hop song in Irish about drugs for being about drugs brings in a very interesting conversation around censorship, because if that was the outlook, then no radio station would be playing any song that indicates anything about drug use, from the Beatles to Post Malone to whoever. So it was that helped with their popularity, which it always does. A ban always helps any musician, and that 2017 was when they began, and then 2017 was when the controversy just began as well.
Well, so now I'm curious about how this movie is landing, because this is a movie that is sort of about, hey, does preserving Irish as a language have to look presentable and respectable the way that it always does on the radio when it sounds very proper? Or can it be, a bunch of young people who are rapping about their right to sell drugs, and that's how the language sort of progresses? And the movie is sort of making this grand argument that actually for young people to be interested in speaking Irish, the one way to do that is to reflect their lives, instead of sort of keeping the language kind of very sort of 30,000 foot. And the movie does this very, very elegantly. What's your reflection on like how the movie's landing with people now? Because I think the movie is now out in Ireland.
The movie is now out. It is it's the most seen movie in the last 6-7 days.
Wow.
Yeah, and it is also, it's gained itself an Oscar nomination for the International Film Feature category, which is huge, to have a film in the Irish language celebrating Irish musicians.
It's going to be Ireland's submission for the Oscars, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's big. It's big. And it's going down so well because the Irish language, there has been this constant need for kind of a renaissance with the Irish language, particularly in schools. And there's a brilliant scene in the movie where the children are being taught the Irish language, but they're learning about how to cut turf and how to tend to the land. So it's stuck in this 18th century mindset.
Yeah.
And the fact that that Kneecap have brought the Irish language to modern levels, it's talking about going out, it's talking about sex, it's talking about dating, it's talking about being young. These are the subject matters that can relate to people a lot more than cutting turf. And when you start policing, exactly, when you start policing how a language is used, you're actually making it a dead language. You need to let a language grow. Like we have an Irish word for internet. The internet didn't exist. So like we have to keep evolving and adapting for its needs and for its uses. And for Kneecap to be bringing it to hip hop music as well just proves just how malleable a language it is, because Irish in itself is a very poetic language. There's multiple words for, say, like the word rain, when in English there's only like one. It's one of those things. It's a very expansive, very literary language, and to have fun with it is a very important thing.
One thing that really is sort of striking with this movie is that, all the members of Kneecap play themselves in it. And I didn't know this going into the movie. You sort of like are just taken in by these incredible actors. And then by the end, you find out those are the actual members of the band. Were you surprised at all by that?
Well, I was surprised by DJ Provi, who is
Yeah.
the teacher turned DJ who wears a balaclava to conceal his identity
Yeah.
when he's performing on stage.
Yeah.
So he's almost leading a lot of the acting in a way, because the two other actors, Makara and Mowgli Bap, they're very young, they're very charismatic,
Yes.
they're very good looking.
Yeah.
Whereas DJ Provi is slightly older and a bit more sensible, but he's kind of pulled away to the
he does
pulled
it
away
so
to the
well.
side of wellness.
I gotta leave
but
it.
it is surprising.
I gotta leave it there, Louise, unfortunately. But again, like, this is the only movie that I've seen twice in theaters. I might go a third time. I don't even know. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here, friend. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Louise Bruton is a culture critic in Dublin. Kneecap is out in theaters now. You really, really should go see it. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. See you tomorrow.